Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Swedish revolver model of 1887, the first of the small frame Nagants, and a key missing link between two of our previous episodes. But before we do all that, let's go over to the light box. With an overall length of 9 1/4 inch and weighing in at 1.7 pounds, this is a fairly diminutive revolver for its time, and yet, in the modern context, perfectly average. This had a magazine capacity of 6 rounds loaded singularly into the cylinder. This was of course the 7.5 Swedish revolver cartridge, which is eerily similar to the Swiss. Alright, I need to interrupt your regularly scheduled program because I have a special announcement that we need to squeeze on in here. For the first time in C&Rsenal history, we actually have a universal sponsor. Yes, we've had other companies that have occasionally helped out on very special projects or subsections of the show, but as of right now, every episode of Primer is in part funded by Ballistol. I don't think they sent us this banner. I think Mae stole this. I'm extremely pleased by this turn of events because this is a product that was already in heavy use by us here at C&Rsenal. I actually have zero concerns about partnering with them. I didn't place this here. It's been sitting here for a month. This isn't even what they sent me. I got it from the store. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Ballistol, it does everything WD-40 pretends to do and more. It's a very handy and inexpensive product, and I burn through cans of it on the regular. This one's already getting kind of low. Since they plan on sticking with us for a while, I'm actually going to start adding some short segments on how you can use this at home. More immediately, however, I will point out that right now, they are selling a unique anniversary edition glass bottle made to look like the 115-year-old original. With many of you being collectors of old things, I figured this would make a nice treat or excellent stocking stuffer while the admittedly limited supplies last. So, you might want to pause the video and run over and buy one of these because, like I said, they are finite. They are not necessarily going to be a product that's available next year. I'm unsure how many are actually in stock at the moment, and you're competing with a bunch of other people who enjoy this kind of stuff. I put mine on the mantle. I actually really like it. But let's get on with the history. Alright, for today's episode, we'll actually be covering the adoption of this revolver by actually two countries, a pair of Scandinavian siblings, Sweden and Norway, who, from 1814 until 1905, shared a common monarch. This arrangement was definitely in favor of Sweden, who had received Norway due to its participation in the Napoleonic Wars. Norway, however, was not entirely okay with this arrangement. A brief war was fought, and while Norway did lose, it also caused enough concern to avoid becoming just another province. Instead, Sweden recognized the Norwegian constitution, making for two largely independent countries under one king and one, albeit Swedish-dominated, foreign policy. Each nation had its own armed forces, which again were largely independent. However, because of the need for joint defense, it was agreed that they should do their best to have common arms, or at the very least, common ammunition. This policy is best seen in the mutual adoption of the Remington rolling block, and yet slight variations were made by each nation. Now, over time, this degree of partnership will eventually fade, but for now, let's just focus on Sweden, who had been using a form of general conscription since 1812. I won't be going into the detail on the structure of the army, but we obviously do care about their sidearms. Sweden's adoption of the försöken in 1863 made it a fairly early adopter of metallic cartridges. Advanced for the time, these single-action only pinfire revolvers would quickly be superseded by centerfire. Sweden would again make a reasonably quick transition, adopting a centerfire revolver in 1871. This was a single action only as well, intended especially for the cavalry. However, there would be some debate between it and actually a carbine. Basically, Swedish use of revolvers broke down into three major categories. Revolvers for mounted troops, which frankly wavered as a goal with arguments for and against just sticking with their carbines. They definitely like issuing revolvers for the artillery, that's number 2. And of course, various officers would need a sidearm. However, they would have to pay for them, which is likely what kept the pressure on to keep advancing the adopted designs in service. When the officers were going to be paying out of their own pockets, they really didn't want to get stuck with some outdated technology. There was also the matter of Norwegian adoption, which had actually technically preceded Sweden because Norway's navy had adopted the försöken in 1861. They would also take on an updated model of 1864 for their cavalry later on. With the Swedish adoption of the 1871, the Norwegians became curious and began trialing the same pistol. While I'm a bit lost on the details, it seems the Norwegian testing would also present an opportunity for Swedish officials to, well, double-check their thinking on the matter. From 1870 through 1877, a series of joint revolver trials would be carried out with various degrees of success. It's frankly a lot to untangle, with lots of overlapping concerns as various camps pushed for different features. So really the usual for a trials process. But let me see if I can simplify this. The Swedish 1871 was tested in both single and double action variations. The Austrian Gasser Kropatschek in 9mm Gasser was also seen, as well as the Swiss Steiger auto ejector, the US Smith & Wesson No. 3, plus the Merwin and Holbert. And very importantly, the Belgian Warnant, a revolver that we know was also finding favor at the same time in Switzerland. You can hear more about that evolution in our episode on the Swiss 1878. And it's actually interesting to note, Sweden was likely paying attention to those Swiss trials. That's because not only did they trial the Warnant, but they also started favoring a small bore high-speed projectile, which was a trend largely emerging from the Swiss school of ballistic experimentation. Over time, this is where we'll find jacketed high-speed bullets, and yet, for the most part, these would be confounded by the ever-present fouling of dirty black powder. Just because you know that a lighter, faster bullet is just as good as a slower, fatter one, that doesn't mean that you want to risk fouling up your gun several times faster when taking it into a war zone. That said, handguns weren't expected to see an expenditure of that many rounds even during a battle. So in reviewing the available firearms, the Joint Commission found that the American guns had just too much recoil and were both a little too weakly constructed. The extra loading features just weren't worth the risk of the potential breakdown. The Steiger wasn't as overpowered, but it definitely was overly complicated and was dropped from trials. The Gasser Kropatschek was felt to be a little too delicate as well, and frankly, kind of outdated. By the end of 1877, this left essentially two designs standing, the already adopted 1871 and the Warnant. Both were only being considered for their single-action utility. Double action was deemed an unnecessary and frankly dangerous feature. It was only considered as an optional for officers. Now, the Warnant had been provided in a 9.2mm caliber, which the Commission felt was a great improvement over the larger bores thanks to the ease of shooting and better accuracy. Ultimately, they would recommend further testing with an even smaller 9mm bored Warnant revolver, modified to be single action only. It doesn't seem this suggestion was followed through. Instead, Sweden seems to have stuck with their 1871 for just a bit longer, judging it to still be a competent revolver, and they even went so far as to adapt their previous Le Fusils to the same centerfire cartridge. This would mean the creation of the model 1863-79. Now, if all this is confusing, let's just do a quick review. Sweden adopted a centerfire single action in 1871, and then later updated their pinfires to the same cartridge in 1879. Norway, however, is still stuck on their pinfires, failing to commit to the Swedish 1871 just yet. Instead, they kept testing, and late in the year of 1880, they would receive a revolver which finally caught their attention. It had been sent over by the Belgian firm Fabrique d'Armes Emile et Léon Nagant, who had already successfully created a Marshall revolver for the Belgian government. That was, of course, the Nagant model of 1878, which was a single and double-action black powder revolver with a manually rebounding hammer. Obviously, we've covered this one before. We've also already seen the model of 1886, an improved, much simpler design with an auto-rebounding hammer. While it was adopted in Belgium some 8 years after the original 1878, the core Belgian patent had actually already been filed back in 1880. While this doesn't quite depict our lockwork today in detail, the key feature is the use of a trigger extension to rebound the hammer automatically after firing. In actual construction, the Nagant rebounding mechanism was paired with, well, what we're currently calling the Marriott style of double action. That's powered by a trigger extension and a hammer nose in order to get it to do a full hammer back and forward. And that was sent over to the Norwegians for evaluation. Firing tests in April of 1881 would encourage the Norwegian Commission to purchase 40 test revolvers. These were received in March of 1882, 20 of them single action only, 20 of them single and double action. They apparently still chambered the Belgian 9.4mm service cartridge. Ultimately, both versions performed very well, and Norway would approve both for purchase. The double actions for officers to buy, and the single actions for specialty troops to be assigned. Funding for the rearmament, however, did not come through. I'm honestly not sure why, but I do wonder if this might not have been a consequence of infighting over just how unified in Norway and Sweden still wanted to be. Selecting a different handgun and cartridge might have been too much for some, but that's actually just my conjecture at the moment. They may have also just been broke. Ultimately, only 150 large frame Nagants would be purchased for officers. These would be dubbed the model of 1883. They were ordered in 1884 and arrived in 1885. There may have been some extras bought in fits and spurts, as serials do show up as high as the low 200s. Now, because the government didn't buy the revolvers specifically for the specialty troops and instead only opted for a small number that the officers would have to pay for, this gun ultimately only really was purchased in double action, because what officer was going to buy a single action only? Now, just as a side note, about this time the Swedish Navy got tired of waiting and went out and adopted their own revolver as well, an identical copy of the French Chamelot Delvin model of 1873. These received the Swedish designation of 1884. It's a decade later. Okay, this is getting a little bit messy. Both countries are still using pinfire cartridges. Sweden also has a center-fire version of that same cartridge. Norway is now using small numbers of 9.4 Nagant, and the Swedish Navy is using 11mm French ordnance. I think. I haven't actually been able to measure one. So yeah, lots of ammo types, lots of different instructions, and lots of different parts and maintenance needs. Now, perhaps because of all of this, another joint commission would be put to work on the pistol problem. And by this time, they had much better options to choose from. With the Swedish 1871 still serving as a control, they would review the Warnant once more, and strangely, the Gasser Kropatschek as well. New to the table, however, was the Nagant 1883 by way of Norwegian interest, of course, and the Swiss 1882. This was a downscaling and somewhat heavy modification of the Swiss 1878, and while we've covered it before, I need to make one quick note here. Swiss documentation credited the 1878 and 1882 revolvers to a combination of features from Belgian gunsmith Jean Warnant and Swiss inventor Rudolf Schmidt. Since we were working from Swiss records, that's how we explained those pistols in that episode. However, since then, we've stumbled on something more, well, compelling. Jean Warnant's rebounding lockwork was definitely reviewed and preferred by the Swiss. However, it was supposedly, from Schmidt's imagination, modified somewhat before being fitted to the 1878. The added features, however, seem to come directly from another Belgian gunsmith, whose patent was filed even before Warnant's. Ultimately, the 1878's lockwork borrowed from both systems near equally, but the modified Swiss 1882 was almost entirely a Fanyu lockwork firearm. However, it did have the Warnant patent ejector rod, which we've seen in detail before, and was fitted with an Abadie system where opening the loading gate would disconnect the double action mechanism, allowing for rapid loading or unloading by pulling the trigger and working the ejector rod. Now, because we understand lockworks better these days, let's briefly consider these firearms not by their names, but by their actual inventors. This was actually a contest between the Warnant, the Fanyu, the Frankot, who was the originator of the lockwork presently in the Gasser, and the Nagant. And by the way, just to make this more confusing, the control was a Lafachaux action, but in a gun manufactured by Frankot. Try to keep up, folks. Now, all of these managed to pass durability testing, which mostly focused on rust. However, for various reasons of construction and performance during firing, the list soon whittled down to just two designs, the Swiss 1882 Fanyu-style lockwork and the Nagant, which actually had a Nagant lockwork in it. Now, I actually happen to have a model 1882 here today, albeit a later one. I also still have, let's see, a Belgian 1886 Nagant, which has all the necessary features to allow us to see what the commission was dealing with when they saw the Norwegian 1883. Let's get a closer look. Alright gang, we have a Belgian 1886 Nagant, which is nearly identical to the 1883 Norwegian. It's just a lot easier to get a hold of. Many more of these were built. And we have a Swiss 1882. Now this guy is a little bit newer because he has the wood grips, and there's been some very slight dimensional differences in the Abadie system, but you get the idea. Now, these are the two major designs that the Commission was looking at that time. And, as you can tell, there's one really big difference between the two of them. The size. This guy is a 9.4mm big boy 1870s revolver, and this is a fairly compact 7.5mm, a very modern construction for that time. This is more reminiscent of a Smith & Wesson K-frame. Whereas this is, well, it's smaller than, say, a single-action army, but not by quite enough, especially in terms of the weight department and having to carry it on your hip all day. So you can understand why this would be a little bit more popular. Now, in terms of lock work, while they do differ, they both offer the same basic features, which is single and double action operation and rebounding hammers, automatically rebounding hammers. It's pretty critical. One distinct advantage right off the bat for this gun, though, is in terms of takedown, because as we saw in our Swiss episode, this gun was designed for the takedown screw to work with their 10 Rappen coin. Fits in that slot perfectly. You're able to assemble and disassemble the gun with just, well, the change in your pocket. This was not a consideration on the original Nagant. Now, when it came down to shooting tests, the larger Nagant and its 9.4mm cartridge were actually winning out in what you'd consider to be reasonable handgun short ranges. The 7.5 only stepped up when testing accuracy out to the extreme 100 yards kind of thing. So, you would think that the Nagant would win outright, but the Commission ultimately decided that, as was with no modification, the 1882 would be their choice. Why? Well, frankly, because it was more petite. Smaller was considered better. Most of the service life of this gun would be in the holster. Interestingly, among their usual design goals of simplicity, robustness, things like that, one stood out as fairly unique for a trials process. The revolver must have a dainty appearance worthy of an officer's weapon. Now, I imagine something gets lost in translation, but that does suggest a strong emphasis on having a compact handgun, and the 7.5mm cartridge made that possible without sacrificing too much in the short range, and with actually some gains in the long range. So the 1882 was ultimately the better choice, and yet they hesitated. Why? Well, it ultimately came down to loading and unloading, because that's a key difference between these two systems. The Swiss were using a Warrant-style ejector and an Abadie gate, whereas the Belgians and Norwegians, who were using the Nagants, were using a flip-out gate with a Perrin style of nested ejector rod that's set down in the arbor. Between these two systems, the Warrant rod, while faster and more positive in use, is external and therefore likely to become damaged. This one is a little flimsier in that you have to pull it out, and then in this position it's kind of unsupported. It could get bent maybe, but you're actively using the gun when this happens, and despite the slow movements and not especially positive click-clack of getting the cases ejected, this guy tucks away in such a way that there's almost nothing exposed and therefore is almost impossible to damage in service conditions. So, a stronger system, if not a slower system. Also, the Swiss has a rear opening gate in line with the gun, whereas the Nagant has a side opening gate. There we go. This gate also disconnects the hammer, which means no bango when you're loading and unloading. This is a positive safety feature, except under one condition, which is that if you go to holster this gun and the holster snags and flips open the gate even somewhat, you can disconnect the hammer by accident or tie it up. In this case, it's jammed, and if it's all the way open, it's not working at all. Well, that means that you could, having accidentally flipped open your gate on holstering the gun, end up in a combat situation in which your gun doesn't go bang, and it takes you precious moments to figure out what is happening. In this particular gun, it's almost impossible for the gate to become open in the holster, and even if it did, the gun still fires. You just might have a case fall out if you're firing at a high angle for some reason. So, in terms of rock solid dependability, well, dumber is sometimes better. Now, thankfully, the commission didn't have to actually choose between these two guns with no modification. Instead, they asked the brothers Nagant if they could produce a scaled-down copy of their excellent revolver for the Swiss 7.5mm cartridge. Nagant would slightly modify the ammo, but the chambering remained effectively the same. There's actually a lot of debate about the safety of shooting Swiss 7.5 from a Swedish revolver and vice versa. From what I have been able to find, and this is limited, lead bulleted ammo is fine either way. The bore diameter and bullet diameters are close enough. However, Swiss jacketed ammo isn't likely to be healthy for a Swedish or later the Norwegian Nagants. This is, however, an issue I have not been able to measure out for myself or test for myself because I don't have those cartridges here. So do your own homework before shoving rounds in things. Anyway, 2,000 rounds would be ordered in April of 1884 and used in further testing between the 1882 and a now sample shrunk down Nagant revolver. This was successful enough to warrant a Swedish order for 30 trials pieces for exhaustive testing now in 1885. Nearly all went well and only a few minor changes would be recommended. The front sight was squared off, the ejector was modified to prevent it from slipping out during firing, and it appears that the grip was lengthened slightly. And with that, the first of the small frame Nagants was ready for adoption, which came by royal decree on February 15th of 1887. So, I guess we can finally get a look exclusively at this guy right here. All right, we have our revolver today, which is actually a little bit worn out. Being a neutral country, you can often find Swedish revolvers in really high condition. This particular guy, he's been there and done that just a bit. A lot of the bluing's faded to gray. The straw is no longer straw, or yellow in color. And if we flip her over, you'd often find these in good condition with this spring right here for the loading gate still in a nice fire blue. But that's all right. We have a revolver that's actually seen some use and therefore is still of excellent pedigree. Now, the first thing to note about this gun is how much it's similar to its precursor, because mechanically there's almost no difference between these two guns. The old Belgian 86, which stands in for the Norwegian 83, and this, the actual 1887 Swede. Really, from the outside, this is just a like a control corner click and scaled down, right? This is just a little bit smaller. The smaller cartridge as well. There's obviously dimensional differences that come into play because of that, but in terms of takedown, lock work, everything, same exact gun, except the one mechanical difference, which is if you look at the ejector rods, all right? Let me go ahead and show you this guy. On the old pattern, we have a tension spring set through, well, I guess you'd call this the ejector sleeve, and it puts pressure on the ejector itself in the form of this particular channel. It's a straight cut channel, as you can see, and therefore I'm just pushing and pulling, and there's a friction sort of detent position. Watch the spring and listen. Just kind of thunk and it just gently settles in there. It's really not a lot to overcome, and therefore, with age, with firing, and especially with a little hotter ammo than the black powder 9.4, you're probably going to see this guy start to jump and eventually get into your way. So they made a change. On the Swedish gun, we now have, well, it looks like the same configuration, and yet if I start tugging on this guy, I'm not going anywhere. Also, before I even pull it out, note that they changed this to a more elongated and textured shape. It's a lot easier to use, which is necessary because we now need to actually rotate this counterclockwise until we get into a little dip. As a matter of fact, if you watch the spring very carefully, you can see that spring rising and falling. It clicks in a little bit better in this position. Once it does, we can pull out and we'll see, yep, we still have that linear channel, and yet right there, there's a turn. That turn is critical to making sure that we don't have our ejector sliding out of the arbor when we don't mean to. And so we can return it to the gun, rotate clockwise, get another little dick as we fall into position, and therefore this thing must rotate and then extend in order to wiggle its way free when we don't want it to. Now in terms of lockwork, this is exactly the same as the previous 1883 and 1886 Nagants, the large frames. But I will point out a unique feature while I go ahead and show you the lockwork again anyway. Because the Swedes adopted, well, a little trick from the Swiss, which is that they went ahead and fitted the takedown screw for the width of their 10 ore coin. So if I take this guy, and I know it's not terribly exciting for the camera, but you can see he fits in there just great, and I can rotate that a few times and it will start to separate our side plate. Let me get you a better look at that. Round and round this screw goes, and if you're smart about using these guys, you want to go ahead and push into that guy, although it's a little awkward to do. There we go for the camera. So if I push, you can see that we can keep that screw tension going the other way, keep the screw head against the right side of the frame, and the entire left side plate is going to be freed. Looking inside, we have a central grip piece and the left side grip plate all attached and screwed into this particular side plate. The right side grip is still retained by a screw to the frame itself, so therefore there's no wood to lose. We have a very large detached piece that we can vaguely keep track of. Now, looking inside the gun, you know what, let's zoom in. We have what we'd currently call a Marriott style of lockwork, although I'm still trying to prove that evolution out. In other words, we have a sprung hammer nose that serves for our double action, and we have a little notch on the hammer extension and a little notch on the trigger extension to serve for our single action. So if we cock this guy back, yep, we got our little kissy lips right there, holding her in place, pulling the trigger separates them, and it all comes crashing down. For double action, we just pull the trigger through. You see it slip by. I can't actually let this fall with the side plate off. It's bad for the pins, but she'd slip by that little hammer nose and then boom, come crashing down. Since it's spring loaded, if I release, that's gonna pop under and we're good to go. Obviously we have our hand, we have our trigger, we have our cylinder stop here. That's our only cylinder stop, mind you. That's gonna be important later. And then we have this big old spring over here. The operable part, the thing that really makes it a Nagant, is actually hidden in the back and can be a little difficult to see. Let me see if I can get that into view. There's a finger right here that is another extension off of the trigger. It actually goes down to the right wall of the frame, then comes around where it can reach back and engage the hammer. So if we pull the trigger, we'll see that hammer fall. And then down in there, there's our finger. And as we come back, oh look, it starts to drag against the hammer. And that finger starts pushing the hammer back until, boom, we're in position. And where we snugged in, that finger also means that the hammer can't fall. I can bang on it all I want. It can't reach, the firing pin cannot reach the primer of the next cartridge unless we pull the trigger and therefore move that finger out of the way. Once it's high enough, the hammer can fall. So it's a combination rebound and block, and it's pretty significant in terms of strength. Not perfect because of how thin it is. We see that commonly broken in the later 1895 Russian Nagants, but it's certainly better than anything that was available at that immediate moment. Now, another feature of this gun that I'm not going to show off right now is this screw that's actually marked F. The whole thing's actually numbered. The takedown screw itself was listed as letter A. I shouldn't say numbered, it's alphaed. So letter A was here. Letter B is actually marked, well, right about there, which is a little confusing because it seems to suggest it's the mainspring, and we can't remove that second, or at least we shouldn't, because letter F, which is way down the alphabet, is actually how you would take this gun apart and respring it more easily, because you can unscrew this screw, and this is actually the subject of Nagant's most significant patent. If you unscrew this screw, the entire trigger guard hinges this way and relieves tension from the mainspring, making it very easy to release and set the mainspring tension of this gun. Extremely simple to get in and out of it, although an unnecessary demonstration now because we've covered that before. All right, just in case you can't see so well down in there, especially with that hidden rebound arm, we'll go ahead and have Bruno whip up an animation.
Step 1. Load the revolver. So pivot open that loading gate and feed 6 rounds individually while manually indexing the cylinder each time. Close her up and we're ready to shoot. Before we start, take note of how incredibly simple this lockwork is. A triple action revolver with rebounding hammer using only 2 springs, the mainspring and a small nose spring. Starting with single action, we'll manually cock back the hammer until its lower extension catches on the trigger extension. A slight pull of that trigger releases the hammer to fall, discharging the round. Double action operation is made possible by the hammer nose. Pulling the trigger causes its extension to press on the nose, tipping the hammer back until the extension slips past, and the hammer crashes down. When we release the trigger, the extension compresses the nose, which allows it to pass before the nose pops back out. As usual, the hand is responsible for turning the cylinder. Attached to the trigger, it is biased forward by the lower arm of the mainspring, which passes through and also serves to reset the trigger. As the hand rises, it catches one of the cylinder's ratchet teeth, rotating the next cartridge into position. Releasing the trigger causes the hand to fall, and it skips down the angled face of the next ratchet tooth. While the hand pushes the cylinder clockwise, this extension off the trigger serves to halt it in the correct alignment. Pulling the trigger causes the stop extension to rise, where it fits into one of 6 scallops in the cylinder. Releasing the trigger allows the cylinder to rotate again. Somewhat hidden behind the hammer is another trigger extension. This one is responsible for providing a rebounding force on the hammer. Pulling the trigger moves the extension out of the path of the hammer, allowing it room to come crashing down. When we release the trigger, this extension presses on the face of the hammer, tipping it back enough to pull the firing pin from the chamber. And that's really about it. This is an extremely simple lockwork, and it's frankly surprising how it never caught on in the wider world of wheel guns. And finally, to unload, we'll open the gate, rotate and withdraw the ejector rod, swing it into alignment with the rightmost chamber, and manually pop out our spent casings, one by one. Alright, let's go shoot it.
Alright, the Swedish have adopted a new revolver. I know you're all curious about the Norwegians, but we'll get there in a moment. The initial order for the 1887 would be for 2,620 revolvers produced by the brothers Nagant in Liège. 2 inspectors were ready to go and inspect the fulfillment, but their travel was delayed, meaning they couldn't get to work until July of 1888. Nagant-made revolvers for Sweden will therefore be marked on the left side with either the initials CL for Christopher Lemchen or JB for John Brandt. The Swedish Navy would also opt for the model 1887, although in smaller numbers, at least at first. Also ordering from the Nagants in Liège, it's estimated they took in 480 starting in 1891. Swedish Naval 1887s will not have the same inspector's initials. Instead, they have a stylized crown on the right side, a naval property mark often nicknamed the cat's paw. I would also probably mention that in between the Army and Navy orders, there would be a very small lot of revolvers sold to the Duchy of Luxembourg. This tiny country had actually already purchased a small number of large frame Nagants for their gendarmerie. Well, an even smaller number of small frame Swedish 1887 models would be sold to them from the tail end of the Swedish contract. These were sold to officers who wanted a more petite pistol and can only be ID'd by a complete lack of Swedish inspection marks and falling into a serial range between roughly 2,600 to 3,000 And, if you look closely, by having a small inventory number on the butt cap. Only 20 are known to have been purchased so far. In 1891, Serbia would become the third nation to adopt the small frame Nagant revolver, although theirs would have a unique modification featuring an Abadie-like loading gate. Since I don't have one here today, we'll cover that in more detail some other time. And of course, finally, we have to talk about Norway, who apparently, ultimately, decided it would still be nice to share an ammunition supply in case of mutual defense with Sweden. Plus, the Nagant was actually pretty good, and the production lines, well, they were already established. Now, this wasn't just a shrug of the shoulders, mind you. While little has been written yet about the Norwegian Nagants, I'm assured by a researcher that the Norwegian committee would try a number of different cartridges and even some of the early gas seal pistols that would go on to be adopted in Russia. Again, the results of this is oddly a pistol that we've already covered. Don't forget, Norway was just receiving their large frame 9.4mm Nagants in 1885. That's about the same time that Sweden was receiving its trials model of 7.5mm Nagants, the one that got changed to make this one. So, 3 additional samples were sent along to Norway with their final shipment of the large bore model. And this is where my research gets a little hazy. Several sources seem to say that the Norwegian Navy was the first to take on the new small bore Nagant in 1889. This was apparently an exact clone of the Swedish, and honestly, it could explain some things. There is roughly, and I mean roughly, a 300 to 400 unit gap between the Swedish Army and Navy serial numbers, with only 20 Luxembourg Nagants to fill that space in. I've also seen claims that the Norwegian Navy serials range from about 2,500 to 5,700, which would again roughly fit into that picture. Until we get confirmation from primary sources, I'm going to say that it's pretty likely that the sale order went like this. Swedish Army, 2,620 units, including that 20 unit bleed off for the Luxembourg. Swedish Navy, an estimated 480. The Norwegian Navy would ultimately order an estimated 3,200 in total from the Nagants, but these would be spread over a longer period. All of these are nearly identical except for, again, inspection markings. Nagant made 1887s devoid of inspection marks are likely for the Norwegian Navy. Introducing a real change and likely separate serial line was the modified Serbian model, which was a very large order for 12,000 units. The Norwegian Army would finally come around in June of 1893, which is when their final version of the Nagant was approved by the Ministry of Defense. Like Serbia, they demanded their own custom model, which means this is the Norwegian model of 1893. Let's get into the light box. With an overall length of 9 1/4 inch and weighing in at 1.7 pounds, this is sounding very familiar. Magazine capacity of 6 rounds loaded singularly through a plain side gate, and the cartridge is now 7.5 Norwegian, which is identical dimensionally to 7.5 Swedish, which is almost dimensionally identical to 7.5 Swiss. Now, I know what you're all thinking. This gun looks nothing like the Swedish model. How can they possibly be related? Well, let me show you. All right, gang, we have our Swedish and we have our Norwegian. While clearly different, let me make sure I list out what makes them indeed similar to each other. They have essentially identical hammers and triggers, trigger guard shape nearly identical. They all have the 3-piece grips. Yep, okay. Both have the same, not quite fluting, it's more of a pill cut. Both use the same single stop system. Both of them have the same ejector texturing. They have the same spring for that ejection. They both swing on the barrel. It's all Perrin style. Both of them have lanyard loops of equal diameter, and both are blued finished guns with some fire blue parts. Let me think. Both use the same central arbor system. Both of them have exactly the same single and double action lock work with a rebounding hammer. I'm going to be honest, they're the same gun. Same chambering, same everything. But it was fun to say all that. As a matter of fact, you might have a hard time making out the key difference between the two particular revolvers. The Swedish had a square front sight, and the Norwegians had sort of a, well, it's not, it's like somebody took a notch out of a half moon sight. It's a little wild, but I'm sure it actually helps because that probably kept down on glare and drew a very nice sight picture. Now, of course, this is not universally true because the Norwegians Navy purchased regular Swedish 87s, so the naval Norwegians tend to have square sights as well. Very, very different guns. Honestly, the big change for the Norwegian army would be in their cartridge. I'm estimating these numbers at best because detailed data is a bit lacking. But look at that cartridge unpatched, jacketed, much improved. Well, until they realized a couple of years later that the lead round was better and reverted to the same as the Norwegian Navy, which was basically the same as the Swedish cartridge. Well, with all that covered and no real need for an animation, I guess we just go straight to letting Mae shoot it. That was clearly an entirely unique experience, never replicated before. So how many of these were made? Well, the Swedish Army order had been made for a fairly limited issue. The initial plan was to just sell their revolvers to their officers. The price, by the way, had been set at 38 krona. In the meantime, the Luftwaffe and Model 1871s would pick up the general issue Slack in Sweden. Norway seems to have had the same general consideration. Orders would be received from 1894, with the first being only just over 2,000 units. Norwegian inspection marks are more stylish than the Swedish. While they are generally in the same position, these look more like monograms. The three most common correspond to inspectors: Jacob Maximilian Gran Pask, Ole Adolf Jolsrud, and Bjorn Kraner. More commonly found is a simple crown over N, which only seems to appear on very late Nagant production revolvers and likely stands for Karl Ingvard Nandrup. Norwegian orders would pick up steam over time. The last year, 1899, saw over 6,000 delivered. The total orders from Nagant would equal 12,400 units, which might make you think that they had a lot more than their neighbors. But it does seem that Sweden would expand their use of the 7.5mm revolver at about the same rate as the Norwegians. They just weren't buying them from the brothers Nagant anymore. They would save money by setting up production at home. Husqvarna Vapenfabrik had been born out of a milling work at the waterfalls just outside Husqvarna. Established in 1689, these would become an arsenal in 1757, which is also when the facility was privatized. Husqvarna would remain the Swedish arsenal until the 1960s, when it sold its firearms production lines over to Carl Gustav Stads. Since Sweden was now expanding issue of the Nagant revolver to various troops who might need not a rifle, the traditional roles, by the way, would be drums, buglers, things like that. Expanding roles for medical orderlies, along with infantry and artillery units, there would also be new troops coming into being, like machine gunners. Husqvarna would begin production in 1897, with the first deliveries arriving in 1898 in Norway. 350 pieces had been ordered by the Norwegian forces. They would top up with another 115 in May of 1901, by the way. These were marked by the same Norwegian inspectors we saw earlier. Swedish deliveries began in 1898 as well, lasting through 1905. The Swedish total adds up to 13,481, with fewer than 150 additionals made for commercial sales. Swedish inspectors for the Husqvarna pistols include Pontus Bruno, Per Theodor Bergsten, and Herman Ribbing. Civilian market guns were supposedly marked with a crown over H, although I'm unsure what that looks like. And while I'm on the topic of Swedish markings, most Swedish Nagants will have unit markings and an inventory number on the right side of the frame. These can stand for a number of units. Here are some common examples. This is not, however, an exhaustive list, so you might have to do your own digging. Most tend to be marked with an L, which is believed to be for the Landstrom. Norway would never establish their own production, accepting some spare parts by the Kongsberg Vapenfabrik. This would be well into the service life of the Nagants, by the way. Remarkably, these two revolvers managed to serve for decades with no real modification. Whereas the Swiss 1882 saw a few minor adjustments, it seems the Nagants fared much better right out of the gate. Or maybe Sweden and Norway were just okay with letting certain things slide, because there is actually one glaring fault with both of these guns. Let me go ahead and show you. Both the Swedish and Norwegian Nagants can do this. Rotate that cylinder when the gun is not locked up. There is no locking bolt on this system. That seems like a minor concern, but it can cause some problems. The biggest of which is that if you have 6 rounds in this gun, and you fire 2, and then reholster, change positions, do whatever you're doing, and then come back and try to fire your additional 4 rounds. If this managed to roll over even once, you're now only going to have 3 rounds, then a 2-round gap, then back to your 6th round overall. That means not 100% reliability in terms of which round is where at any given time. The Swedish also felt that they had a problem with the hammer being snagged and then forced back and then being allowed to drop on occasion, so sort of a smack. This is unlikely to cause a problem unless you get almost entirely all the way back and just barely miss the sear, but it is a potentiality, and it probably happened at least once because they were concerned about it. Well, in Sweden at least, a solution was found, sort of, by then-Lieutenant Tor Fabian Tornell. His creation was a 2-piece trigger with an interesting inset spring. In this way, whenever the trigger was at rest, the top of the forward bit served as a cylinder bolt. Pulling the trigger freed the cylinder to rotate, and the original stop served to align the chambers. Small problems with the Tornell system. Alright, if we want to load or unload our gun, we can't just roll the cylinder, it's blocked. You have to gently pull the trigger while loading or unloading in order to rotate. That's not good. It also meant that, because again, cylinder cannot rotate without pulling the trigger, you couldn't cock single action unless you rode the trigger a little bit first. That's an even more concerning issue in terms of booger hooks and bang switches. Now, the Tornell system was actually adopted by Sweden by royal order, mind you, between the Nagant and Husqvarna contracts. However, it appears that the feature was entirely optional and had to be paid for out of pocket by any officer who wanted it fitted to their own pistol, which means it was exceedingly rare. Very few examples exist to this day. Now, other Swedish changes would actually be limited to just really the cartridge. Like Norway, they actually attempted a jacketed bullet, although theirs was in 1898. And they attempted using smokeless powder. Velocity apparently wavered severely, and the groupings would widen up, so they soon returned to black powder and lead ammo. Both nations, however, would have to make changes in the 1930s, largely in response to international agreements against soft bullets, meaning that they both finally settled on an acceptable jacketed bullet and smokeless powder load. Now, of course, these revolvers, well, both of them really, would be replaced with automatic pistols, and because the Swedish and Norwegian Union had been slowly eroded and then dissolved officially in 1905, each would face different challengers. Sweden would adopt the FN Pistol de Guerre of 1903, which they did so in 1907, surprisingly calling it the model of 1907. This was a Browning-designed blowback, slide-operated, detachable magazine-fed semi-automatic pistol. It chambered the 9mm Browning cartridge, which was made just about as hot as you can get while not ruining your hand when shoving it in an unlocked breech handgun. Interestingly, this cartridge was apparently Nagant compatible. I know that because I have this, which doesn't actually have a name that I know of. This is a bog-standard Swedish 1887 bored out for the 9mm Browning cartridge with rifling to match the model 1907 pistol. The cylinder has been replaced with a new-made example, again in that 9mm cartridge. Operation of the revolver is absolutely the same as the 1887 original model. This gun is honestly a bit controversial. I've had feelers out for years, and I've only ever seen anything written on it from German researcher Rolf Müller. The very reliable works from Swedish writer Arne Thell don't seem to mention it, at least what parts of his particular catalog I've been able to find to date. Müller, however, states that this was a prototype of sorts, an attempt to keep the new automatic pistol and the old wheelgun revolver on the same ammunition. His example in his book has no serial number on the frame, no inspection marks. It was just marked Husqvarna. The barrel and small parts do seem to have a serial number, and a fairly low one at that. Mine isn't quite the same, but let's get a look. All right, here is our original 1887, and here is our converted model. Realistically, the only difference you're going to see is in the cylinder, although the bore has changed somewhat as well. This gun's also in better condition. We still see a lot of the straw, a nice deep dark blue, and if I flip her over, oh yeah, we've got some straw in that spring. Somebody's been taking care of this guy, which may lend itself to the idea that it is actually a commercial solution, but I just wanted to make sure I showed you this guy since we happen to have it around. The big changes are in the flutes. We actually have small little flutes that go all the way to the front of the gun versus our little pills, well actually deep pills from the regular 7.5. That's because you couldn't bore this gun out to the new 9mm caliber without, well, ruining the integrity of the cylinder. So a new made cylinder was provided and of course thickened up with a very slight flute to only reduce some of the weight in order to allow that 9mm to fit. This particular gun is a less likely candidate for even being one of the fabled trials pistols because it has a unit number right here. That would be weird for a gun that wasn't supposed to be inspected or unit marked from the one other example I know of for sure. We mentioned these earlier in the episode, but just to be clear, this is our number for the weapon within the letter indicated unit of the army. The L in this case stands for Landstormen, the Swedish territorial guard made up of older males in times of war. With more FN pistols showing up and then being made domestically, the revolver was pushed into reserve roles like that one. It's very unlikely that an experimental pistol received such a marking, and I've been unable to untangle just when the experiments versus the Landstormen inventory marking might have been applied. So for now, this guy remains a bit of a mystery. Is it a leftover experiment or a commercial trinket, or some hybrid of both? Either way, I'm gonna make Mae shoot it. Neat. But since this is still a mystery, let's just keep going with the actual known quantities. Norway would replace their revolver in 1914. There's a whole story here, but we'll cover that another day. These 45 caliber semi-automatics would, like in Sweden, displace the Nagants, but not entirely wipe them out. Norwegian Nagants would be pushed further and further down the priority tree, eventually settling in the reserves and Landstorm as well. Both countries would keep these in service all the way through World War I and on into World War II. The German occupation of Norway saw the Nagants seized and recorded in German inventories as Revolver 610N. Post-war, the Norwegian Nagants did not return to official use, at least as far as I've been able to find. However, the remaining government stocks were not completely sold off until the 1980s, so there may have been some secondary use that I am not entirely aware of. In Sweden, the Nagants served in reserve through both world wars as well. They were certainly of help in the large mobilizations of those war years, but did not see direct combat. Officially, the service life of the 1887 was halted in 1945, which is when they were largely moved to storage, but they still managed to find a sort of civil service. Even after the Second World War, Swedish Nagants would stay in use by various state security forces, transportation services, and rural postmen. Even after that, some revolvers were bought back by Husqvarna for sales to civilian security personnel. The bulk of Swedish Nagants were sold out of government stores, again in the 1980s. That makes both of these extremely long-lived designs despite their obvious faults. The big question, however, is would they have been really worthy in a fight in their original years? Well, we can't know that for certain, but we can speculate wildly about it with a little help from Mae. All right, once more, we've made room for Mae.
Hello.
And we have a smattering of old dirty wheel guns.
He loves the word smattering so much.
What word? Okay, give me another word.
No, smorgasbord?
That's too few for a smorgasbord. Look, I know what a smorgasbord looks like, okay?
All right.
All right, like skinny, you can't.
I don't know, I could fit some Thanksgiving up in here.
Oh, we're almost there.
I know.
By the time you guys see it, I think we're clear of it. All right, so.
Really?
Yeah, our schedules, we film pretty far ahead nowadays.
Oh, okay.
It's the only way we can do all the editing in time.
It's true.
So, we have the Nagants.
Yes, we have Nagants with other things mixed in.
Well, there's one thing.
Well, one thing, yeah, the Swiss.
But this is basically, this sucks because we're stuck in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Which means it's going to be basically a comparison between things. But before we go into all that, let's forget all the other guns for a moment.
Okay.
And just from square one, why don't you describe this to me?
Okay. Well, am I at least able to know what a Nagant is? Because this definitely does have a Nagant look to it. In terms
you can say it has the Nagant vibe. That's fine.
It's got a Nagant vibe. I guess it's because, well, don't get me wrong, the shape in and of itself kind of reminds me of a Nagant look, but these grips...
Yeah.
These grips, like this extra bits of wood that are not wraparound like we've seen before with British guns, but these extra cuts right here, those definitely scream Nagant to me. Yeah,
it's actually kind of an interesting hybrid because usually you'd have, let's say, a full wraparound one-piece grip like you would on most British revolvers. You know, the early Webleys, certainly like the Tranters and stuff we were playing with recently. Yeah. Those are comfortable grips. However, it's a big piece of wood that can get chipped and broken and can swell or shrink over time, dry out, crack, whatever, right?
Right.
Then you have the side plate guns. And generally, that's a piece of metal down the middle or maybe off to one side and two side plates. And especially if it's off to one side, you end up with one really big side plate, you know, or it's not side plate, but side...
grip.
Yeah, a grip plate. And again, same problem. That big mass of wood can shrink or expand, crack, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
In Nagant's case, you actually have 3 fairly small pieces of wood.
Well, 4.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, there is
4. There's a little
That's not actually
forward.
a 4th. That's a wraparound of this other one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's actually one internal piece that's checkered front and back.
Well, I stand corrected.
We saw it earlier in the episode.
I didn't watch that part yet.
Yeah. So we have 2 thin side plates, and then we have a thicker piece of wood in the middle. That thicker piece of wood is clamshelled in there. It's actually pretty strong. Okay. And it makes it feel almost like it has one continuous wood grip.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing I was going to say, because I can't really feel where the metal starts. I mean, if I obviously use my finger pads, I can texturally feel the difference, but when I just have the grip in my hand, it feels like one continuous grip. It's pretty cool.
So that means you've got checkering on the left and right side, down the spine of the gun into your palm. And then
down here with my pinky, and technically a little bit of my ring finger, too.
Yep.
It's pretty comfy.
We have to take extra photos now.
I know. And this is where this starts.
Okay, so the grip is really nice.
Yep, grip is really nice. And like I said, it has kind of a Nagant-y look to it. Obviously, we're dealing with a revolver here. There are a lot of things here that are quite familiar to me. I have a gate loader in which I need to put the gun into my left hand in order to operate, not kind of like cavalry style like we've seen before with... So the French 92 is kind of what I like to reference, even though that's a swing-out cylinder, but it swung out to the right. Right. So it's kind of funny.
Well, that's because the expectation was to take the revolver and your reins in the left hand, manipulate with your right.
Exactly.
Just like the idea is that they would take their reins in the left hand and fight with their sword in their right. So they're trained for reins left hand and manipulation right hand.
Makes total sense. Can't argue with that. Stiff gate. Gotta love it. There's no real solid assist in rotating that cylinder. It is one that you do have to manually pull over, but I will say, at least it does have that moment where if it rolls back a little bit, even a little bit with everything set in the half-cock position, it rolls the cylinder up perfectly so that it aligns so that you can load in a cartridge still. So that's pretty decent.
You don't have a half-cock position, just to warn you.
Oh, that's just a manual that's an automatic rebound position.
It's an auto rebounder. You don't have to do the half-cock.
Yeah, kind of nice.
But, sorry, I think we got two things confused there. The indexing for the cylinder is such that when you roll past one of the notches, or one of the ratchet teeth for indexing the cylinder, once you roll past it, if you wind it backwards to set back on that tooth, they go ahead and have the chamber in line with the port, and therefore you can load to that point, which means even in the dark, you can find where your loading point is very quickly.
Which is pretty good. That's a pretty nice feature to have.
True, but there is no positive detent like we saw in, say, the Fanyu that we looked at a little bit.
Right, no.
Which was also in the Dutch 1891 episode, where it had a blade that held it right where it's supposed to be.
And you could feel it, you could hear it and feel it clunk into position properly.
The Swiss 78 would katonk into the right position and hold, and then all the Abadi guns will just swing to exactly the right position and align for you.
You don't got to worry about it at all.
So we're not quite that good, but we're better than just sort of floating in the ether.
Yeah, we're better than free floating, so at least there's that. We're not in space. Okay. And then obviously, I guess I want to say it kind of might feel a little bit denser than I was expecting, but it's definitely a forward of my fingers, pretty much everything.
Yeah, at first glance, it's the size of like a K-frame-ish.
Yeah, it seems like it should be pretty light.
And then I go to pick it up and I go, ooh, that is very dense.
There's a little more density to that than I anticipated.
Yeah, I could beat somebody with this thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you think it would bend if you hit somebody with it?
Maybe.
Like where?
No, it definitely would not. This thing feels pretty solid, actually.
Yeah, I think maybe I could
damage the
dislodge the ejector rod.
That's the only flimsy feeling
I'm flexing
thing.
on it now, and actually I can't get any flex out of it.
No, and speaking on that ejector rod, I love the knurling that they put on here. It's pretty positive knurling on that.
That's fancy.
I know, right?
It's very aggressive too.
Yeah, they definitely didn't want you to mess up with that. Although it does feel. Yeah, that literally is, this probably is one of the flimsiest things that is on this gun in and of itself, but it's an ejector rod. They all kind of are, most of them are pretty flimsy.
Well, the Warnet one was pretty shrouded and protected, but it was fixed to the side of the gun where it could take damage. This is one of those interesting games where we'll tuck it away where it won't get hurt at all, but then when we pull it out, all bets are off because it's a pretty flimsy rod. I think the worst offender for this is actually the Bodeo, which also uses what's known as a Perrin style.
Oh, God, yeah. That one was terrible.
It's a Perrin style, which means an ejector rod that's rotating around the barrel and then coming back, right? And it hides inside the central arbor.
And that one just wiggled all to heck. I remember that.
Right. So that is like the Bodeas, I don't know how any of them aren't bent or ripped off, but this one's a little more solid than that.
Yeah, so without comparing it to the other Nagants and things on the table, essentially, in general, it has a Nagant look and feel to it. It's a little denser.
You said you weren't going to compare it to Nagants, and then you said it looks like a Nagant.
These Nagants necessarily on the table. I have to know what a Nagant is because I went, oh, look at the grips. They kind of Naganty grips.
Okay, it looks Naganty. We got that part. Yeah. But what else?
It's got the density to it. It's got some really nice fluting here in the barrel that I really appreciate. The barrel? And the cylinder, sorry. It's really scalloped out of there. Which gives me a solid push with the cylinder when rotating it, which is nice.
Unexpected bonus is control the cylinder, although they're just there really to lighten it down without reducing strength.
I just like the little bonus features.
You haven't mentioned the lock work at all.
Just in terms of working? Oh, I didn't know we were going to get that far into it. Yeah, okay well, operating the hammer, pretty heavy pullback. Can't say that's my favorite, but...
You don't seem to have any problems.
Yeah, no, I'm going to try to... it's not too bad.
It's not wicked lightning fast, but you didn't slip or struggle.
No. So that's okay. And then the trigger, I remember, very heavy double action trigger, and then single action.
That's a safety.
That's a safety, yeah. It is a
In
safety
military
feature.
revolvers, the heavy double action
I get it.
was entirely intentional.
I understand. After listening to all the cries of the 1900 stuff, rising up to the 1907 and the trials and stuff, I remember that being a thing. Yeah, it's been fascinating. Anyway.
That one guy shot his horse.
I know. But they wish they'd given him this one instead. Anyway, so yeah, hammer and trigger on this guy are both incredibly heavy. Although...
Smooth?
Smooth, yeah. Smooth hammer pullback, trigger itself. Now, it feels smooth now. Mm-hmm. And I remember on range when shooting, it felt smooth for the most part. I think until we got to... It was either the second to last or the last round where I felt a snag, and then I basically let go of the trigger a little bit and was able to pull through from there. So I don't know if that was the gun or if that maybe might have been something to do with ammunition, since it's a little bit off.
Truth be told, the ammo on this is a bit janky. We ended up having to go, because of the projectiles that were available to us, we had to go with a 7.5 millimeter jacketed round, which was pulled from Swiss commercial ammo, which we also used the cases, but we just changed the powder load. We did keep it smokeless because, frankly, we just wanted to do it smokeless. Trying to work up a black powder load for this and then waste those projectiles getting closer to the velocity, and we had very few projectiles, meant that we kind of knew what we had with the Swiss, and we could dial it back a little bit for the Nagants. We tried to do that, and because of the sheer limited number of rounds that we had available to construct with at that time, we frankly eyeballed it. So we are running reduced power from the Swiss. We're not exactly sure how many feet per second we shed. And so therefore we could be running a little bit hot on these guys compared to what they were supposed to be historically. So please forgive them a little bit from our inability to sort of experiment for months with 2 dozen rounds.
So you're saying that this may have had less snap to it than what it did?
Yeah, I know. I'm not sure. The problem is we were so close to the wire. I mean, we fired every round we owned. You know what I mean? We fired everything to get these 2 guns shot. So we were very lucky that both of them shot all 6 rounds. And that was, because that's all, between that and the Swiss, that's what we had.
Well, and the high-speed footage, yeah. So that's pretty much it.
I need to find an appropriate bullet, but obviously that comes and goes very quickly in the current market. So I do have the cases. I can try again if I can get the bullet figured out later on down the road.
All right, Nagants round 2. Let's go.
Okay. But
yeah, so recoil on this, getting into that snappiness bit. Yeah, there was a bit of snap to it, but I think I'm partly to blame for that because when pulling the triggers on some of these guns, especially Nagants, when they get to be that heavy for a trigger pull, I tend to prefer my grip.
Scoocher.
I tend to prefer to scooch a little bit to get a more of a linear pull through because I found...
You're going to get a sued.
For scooching?
Yeah, that guy on the other side of the state, he's got that show, Scooch Double Odd.
Scooch? Oh no, I did a scooch.
Nobody tell him I said that. He gets grumpy easily.
You could tell him I said that. That's fine. I think he's okay with me. Although he does duck your calls every once in a while.
What is up, bro?
Anyway, so I did scooch down a little bit on the...
You're going to say Such.
So I was going to say Such. I'm trying not to because of this guy. Anyway, so obviously I have to go up to manipulate the hammer, and if I come down to the knuckle, you can see I'm at a bit of an angle, which...
It's how you're supposed to shoot it.
It doesn't feel that comfy.
You're supposed to use the knuckle.
So I end up scooching down a little bit to get more of a linear pull through, which does cause a higher bore axis, which does cause an extra flip. How much, though? We haven't done the science on it.
We can do an experiment once. That's perfectly fine.
I say we science someday.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
We don't have any ammo. Oh, wait, no, we literally can't.
We can pick another gun. May, we can pick another gun.
It's impossible. Okay. There's no way.
You're right. We're doomed.
Anyway, yeah, okay, so that's pretty much everything in that shell, except for sights. That's, I guess, the only thing I really haven't touched on for this one. Pretty run-of-the-mill revolver sights in that they are tall.
Wait, that's not run-of-the-mill in our show.
Hold on. And that they are, for revolvers in general, revolvers tend to
We've had tall sights on for revolvers in this show.
For some revolvers, they've been taller than some of the pistols.
Okay.
But the V-notch is pretty deep set here in the back, which is unusual. It's this inverted triangle at the front. I don't think I remember us technically having a lot of inverted triangles. I could be wrong, though.
It's a fairly chunky front sight.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't appear to be... I mean, if you hold a 6 o'clock hold, it's not that chunky. A little tiny thing.
Well, while we're talking about front sights... Is there anything different between the Norwegian and the Swedish that you would like to remark on?
Oh, okay. Well, obvious clue there. front sight, a little bit different.
That's
which
it. Find something that's different.
Hold on.
Find me a difference other than that front sight and markings.
They don't mark. Oh shoot. Okay. Damn it. I was literally about to say markings. No, I don't really see any solid differences. There's like nothing,
it's the same gun.
It pretty much is the same gun. Even down to the knurling on that ejector rod. That's pretty wicked. Although, I will say, if I'm looking at the one thing I'm going to look at for differences is the sights. I'm going to look at both of them real quick.
Are you holding them up one to each eye? Is that how you're looking at them both at once?
Well, I have them far enough forward that I really can just work with my right eye with both of these.
Okay.
You know, I'm going to say...
Okay, hold on.
The Norwegian... Sorry, hold on. I'm going to say the Norwegian front sight is superior because...
Oh, take that, Swedes!
Because when you are looking at this weird shark fin from the rear sight, there's a little bit of a shadow. I love that I have two guns on my hand. I'm still doing this. There's a little bit of shadow that's created behind this little notch that's sticking up from the front sight, and it's making it a little bit visually easier for me to locate and utilize.
The best description I've heard of this sight, because somebody was trying to write it in text, and of course I'm reading it from like translated Swedish or Norwegian or whatever it was.
Was it Willy? Free Willy? The whale? Because it looks like a whale.
Well, no, it's you'd call it a half moon sight except for that notch, right?
Right.
So somebody described it. Oh god, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase, but they basically
a slice from a cheese wheel.
No, they said it's two offset quarter circles.
Okay, yeah,
because you have a quarter circle and a quarter circle. Instead of a half circle, you have two quarter circles, and one of them's lower than the other.
What else would you call this? Other than Willy from the movie, The Whale.
No, his flopped over. That one, that was the sad part. Do you know how many complaints SeaWorld got because of that?
Right.
Anyway, so...
Oh, no. Forgot about that. All of a sudden just all came back.
Okay. But
anyway, I would argue that Norwegian's superior for the front sight, but in terms of operation, if I remember correctly... No real difference in the hammer or the trigger. Both are heavy and just as smooth-ish for pull through.
You really don't like...
Loading and unloading, not much of a difference. Nope, ejector rod's the same. So just technically, if I had to pick between the two, I guess the Norwegian would technically win. Oh, I guess, yeah, pretty much.
Well, now let's begin the real game of comparison.
Because
we also have this, the old 1886. Which is mechanically identical except for the way the ejector rod works.
Yep.
However, it is whatever percentage
scaled
bigger.
Up? Yeah.
So that's the chibi version of this.
15%.
So you take that.
I think that's my guess.
What do you think? Between that and the small frame, what's your opinion?
Well, the 86 is obviously bigger, heavier, which makes it slightly more awkward for my hand whenever they are of the larger scale. Black powder gun, which, not the best comparison for smokeless, because the recoil on this one's going to be softer is the better word to use. Yes, I'm going to make you use the same word as me because
it's not less. It's just softer.
It's like I don't even know how to describe the differences between. It doesn't quite have the flick or the flip off that you get from the smokeless.
More of a boom, less of a bang.
It's like thunder versus lightning kind of deal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, I guess,
Colt
thunder,
had
that's
two
lightning.
pistols, one of which was named a Thunderer, and the other one was named the Lightning.
No, he had three, the Rainmaker.
Oh, and the Rainmaker. Yeah. And the Omnipotent.
Everyone forgets about the Rainmaker because it was the least common one.
Everybody forgets about the Omnipotent, too, which is the best name. Anyway, so...
Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of presenting the gun.
Yeah.
It's heavier, probably harder to pull through the trigger because of the, I guess, dimensional differences.
Yeah, and heavier to pull the hammer back, too, just because I have to reach so far up.
Do you think the spring tension is any different, or do you think that's just the ergonomics of it?
It's hard to make that call. Frankly, it could be a little bit heavier, but simply for me having to crawl up the gun, I've got a different leverage point, so that one's... Wait, your hand.
Yes, my hand is very masculine.
It is larger, so...
Behold my power.
Now wait, do that on this. Maybe you'll actually be able to tell. Although
Behold my power. They're the same.
Are they? That one looked lighter to me when you were pulling through. Maybe you were just more confident.
It's a shorter throw because
maybe you're just more confident.
No, I literally think it's scaled down, so it's a shorter arc.
That's probably.
It just had less distance to travel.
Okay.
If we strap them together, we're gonna need a differential.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell, though.
Okay,
it doesn't.
but you didn't fire it yet. You just talked about how it's awkward to
I
hold
talked
up
about
and
the
pull
recoil in general.
You just said the recoil's softer.
Yeah, it's
But
softer,
that doesn't mean anything.
it doesn't really feel like it's as bad as this one, though. But again,
Okay, so more tiring to hold up and carry around.
yeah, more tiring to carry around.
More tiring to use.
Yep, in general, it's not as easy for me to use.
Do you think that is to the point of reduced accuracy if firing 12 rounds?
As in, do you think that's going to make that much of a difference?
Yeah,
between
30
the two?
yards if you're shooting, or not 30 yards, I'm sorry, at something like 30 to 40 feet.
I think it's possible I might not get as many off. I think it's possible I could be more tired with that one. Do I think I'll be incapable of shooting that many rounds off? No.
Okay. Now,
Definitely not.
cartridge,
Okay.
9.4, 7.5, both black powder at the time, lead rounds.
Yeah, bigger
Which one-
round, slower.
Which one, if you only get one shot,
Yeah,
which one do you want to shoot with?
kind of want to shoot with the 9.4. But a bigger round.
I'm not sure I
bigger
bought in this whole
hole.
7.5 thing. So the problem is, does this reduce your speed enough
Yeah.
to be worth the cartridge difference? You know what I'm
So
saying?
here's the thing.
I'm picking
this. Wait, I'm probably going to pick that too.
No, I'm
Interesting.
picking this. I want to make sure I said it before you copy me.
No, hold on.
I'm just saying
There's
it
a
before she
good
copies
reason
me.
to do that. There's a good reason to pick the bigger boy
Yeah, because
because
I said so and you're copying me.
oh my god, y'all. So my reasoning on it would be before he gives his reasoning. Frankly, it's not going to be my primary arm. Hopefully, that's not going to be the main thing that I'm using. Hopefully, that's my secondary. So hopefully,
If you're an officer, it might be all you have.
oh, well, then I definitely want to put him down. I feel as if the larger round will probably put a
That's what
man
I'm saying.
down harder.
You're making the excuse that it's probably not your primary arm, but I'm telling you, if it is my primary arm, weirdly, if it's not, if I have a carbine, I might just carry that because it's light and who cares. Mm-hmm. But if this is all I got, I think you're about to say it backwards.
Oh, okay. I guess I could see that.
Which
Dang.
is why the correct answer was Othais is right, and I'm just copying him.
This is a very difficult show to make for many reasons.
And yet, where's your heart at?
I like using the 7.5 Swedish one more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just easier for me to handle and get an actual grip on it. It's, in general, just more Mae hand friendly.
That's fair.
Yeah.
If that came in a 9mm, would
That'd
you
be
be
kind of
excited?
interesting.
Do I have news for you?
Yeah. It's hard to act kind of surprised when I...
You already shot it.
when I've already shot it. It's like,
Look, you might be stupid and not remember.
Right? That's possible. It's been a long 7 years.
Wait, are we on 7 years of this show?
Yeah. That happened.
I quit. Show over.
Anyway, I think so. I could be wrong. Yeah, okay. So I could feel, although, is that lighter?
No.
No. Maybe? No. Okay, never mind.
No.
I just wanted to take
It's
a
like
second.
the cylinder's
That was
slightly
weird.
heavier because of the large... It's weird. The cylinders doesn't have as much in the way of lightning flutes, but the chambers are bigger.
Right.
And then it's bored out more.
Yeah, I noticed, the flutes are
So
definitely baby flutes
I don't know what the
now.
net change in metal is, but it's not very much either way.
No. I mean, we retained some things that look very similar and feel very familiar. That's still a pretty heavy hammer, pretty heavy trigger pull. Maybe the gate's a little bit cleaner. And that could just be wear on the gun. Yeah, no. The sights are the same.
It's the same gun.
Yeah, pretty much. There's really not any much
Just-
difference other than just the fluting change up and the actual cartridge
Describe
change
the
up.
recoil, because that's really where we're going with this.
You know what's interesting? I think that this 9mm one, I think the recoil was a little bit less snappy. I think it was a little softer. I think it was not quite as much snap to it.
Now, that could be our ammo loads again, especially because we were using some surplus 9mm that we had.
And I'm going to go back and review the footage just to make sure I'm not crazy, but I'm actually fairly certain it was a little bit lighter.
Yeah.
It's so weird to me.
What I'd really like to know is which was worse for you between this 9mm Browning revolver or the 9mm Browning FN 1903 that you
Ooh,
shot.
that's
Because
curious.
that was a blowback pistol that we felt
that's
was
been
very
a
snappy.
while ago, too.
Yeah, we were going, this is like the limit for a blowback pistol, this 9mm Browning, right? And we kind of were
this
like,
felt better
ooh,
for it.
that's sharp.
This felt better for that.
You think
for
so?
For the cartridge, yeah, of
Is
course.
it just because you're used to more power coming out of revolvers, though?
You know, I don't think so. I think that one...
There's no way. Mechanically, that pistol should have a lower bore axis. The recoil system should be, well, not recoil, but even just the blowback in the spring.
Yeah, it should be blowing back
eating
more
up,
linearly, yeah.
Well, no, it should be eating up some of the recoil.
Right.
You know, some of the force should be expended in the slide, which means by the math, you're supposed to have lighter recoil on that system. I think you're prejudiced because this is a revolver, and you are used to revolvers being...
Oh, maybe. Yeah, because I'm used to being so snappy or having to pull the hammer through or the trigger through because it's always just such a dang heavy trigger. I might be overcompensating.
Yeah, I think you expect to feel the full force of the recoil when you're dealing with a revolver. On a pistol, you expect it to be attenuated to some degree.
You might be onto something there. That is possible.
So
now I want to go back and shoot it.
Between the two, 9mm or 7.5?
I'm going to go with the 9.
9mm Browning?
Yeah, I can't see going to 7.5 when I can pick 9.
This is the best. And you can't have it because they're rare.
That's so sad.
This is an old callback. I've had this for years because our buddy, our executive producer, Rusty.
Oh, yeah. It's been a while.
Yeah, he actually found that many years ago,
right?
and I tucked it away. He's alive. I talked to him.
Good.
I tucked it away many years ago because it was inexpensive and sitting in a shop. He goes, "What's going on here?" And I went, I know that there's something weird about that, so I just tucked it away.
You just kind of snagged it.
So that one's been waiting for an episode for a very long time.
Nice. Well, I'm glad it finally made it.
And
that
now
has
no
been
one
a
will
while.
watch this one because it's a revolver episode
Well,
and it's
Nagant.
Scandinavian.
Maybe it says the word every once in a while something
There's
gets
going to be
through.
a million comments about the 1895 Russian. And they go, you didn't mention the gas seal. You didn't mention the gas seal.
There's a whole episode
You
on
could
that
silence it. You could silence this. You can't silence it. These aren't gas seal. This is the other one.
Just
That's this one
some
right here.
threading on the barrel, and then we can throw it on the silencer.
Speaking of which, while we're talking about that,
Yeah. Hey, he made it.
between the two, do you want the gas seal 7.62?
I need to feel something that's horrible
the
again.
Uncircumcised cartridge?
Oh, let me just feel that again. Oh, yeah, like rubber butter.
Rubber butter.
God.
Rubber.
I needed to feel the terribleness that was that, because I think the last time I handled this...
That's a good one.
I know. I think the last time I actually handled this gun was the actual shoot that we went to with it.
It's beautiful.
I don't think I want this. I don't want this at all. Even though mechanically this is so many improvements.
The entire line. You know what the problem is? It's like
the sight's rad.
We got this far right here, right?
Yeah.
This is as far as we got. And it was brilliant. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Especially at the era. It's okay. Like this auto-rebounding hammer, single and double action. It could use some sort of ejection system, but okay, fine. We missed the boat on that a little bit. We know it can take an ejection system because of the Serbian model that we haven't been able to get a hold of, but that had an Abity-style system on it. We'll talk about those one day whenever I get a hold of one.
Eventually.
The problem is, actually, it's very odd to me. The Nagant, when you compare it with, say, this 1882, right? Disregard the scale for a second. Lockwork-wise, this is a Fanyu lockwork. We've been through that elsewhere in the show.
Right.
The Fanyu lockwork is still in use today. This is what you see in all the Colt Pythons and things like that, is a Fanyu lockwork with an added hammer block, right? This gun accomplishes everything that the other gun accomplished in the lockwork. It has both single and double action, and it has a rebounding hammer with a sort of block mechanism. In the Fanyu system, enough force, it takes a lot, but enough force will overcome the hammer.
Right.
But you're talking about extreme examples, right?
Yeah. But the possibility is there.
Right. Or not overcome the hammer, it'll overcome the rebounder for the hammer. It has an angle that is supposed to prevent that, but under enough force and inertia, you can overcome it. Which is why you see Smith & Wesson and Colt adding hammer blocks to their Fanyu or modified Fanyu lockworks. Right. Later on.
Sure.
This gun has that extension off the trigger that's engaged on the hammer.
How strong is that?
That's what I'm saying. On the Russians, I have on occasion found ones where the rebound is broken because it's taken a very strong direct hit. But how much is that is Russian service? And also, the Russians have an extremely thin rebound extension because probably of all the gas work that had to go into this, like the gas seal lock work.
Right.
These guys have very thick rods for pushing that guy back. I'm wondering how hard of a blow it can really withstand. As a matter of fact, even if it could crack, I wonder if it wouldn't be possible to build a version of the Nagant that has two tongs or stirrup-shaped tongs or something to just make it a little more reinforced.
Right.
I have a feeling that the Nagant can handle a lot more of a blow than the Fanyu or Warnant systems would have, because they both use similar rebounders that are at the tail of the hammer off the mainspring.
Right.
This is off the trigger, And it's a hard rod in front of the hammer.
Yeah, it feels like it's such an opposing directional force that it would take a lot more to overcome.
I could be wrong. I don't have the ability to model the engineering for this. And I certainly don't want to ruin what are very hard to get. Like, all of the non-Russian Nagants are hard to get.
That is not our show.
Right, and so I don't want to sit here and smash these. That would be very bad. But I'm curious about it because
it's an interesting thought.
It's an abandoned system that is absolutely competitive. It's the only system I know of that is, in terms of simplicity and operation, competitive with what is now the standard.
Right.
And yet it stayed only on Nagant. The only people I know that use Nagant lockworks that weren't Nagant were like Spanish clones.
Right.
Not even, nothing mass market seemed to have copied the Nagant that I know of, which is weird because a lot of people are like, oh, this is a Nagant style pistol. And you're going, almost none of them are.
Yeah.
It's very much in its own little wheelhouse. So that part to me is very fascinating too, just how little legacy it has once it hits the Russian 1895.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, this thing is, I'd like to redo this episode because I think we missed some of the details that could have gone into this. This is a freaking nightmare of trying to twist. It's almost like you get in this point where psychologically, right? You go, okay, this is nice, but can we be more civilized? Right?
Can we be more presentable for public?
Well, you look at it, and what did the Swedes do? Well, they took the Swiss 7.5 cartridge that they liked, and they wrapped the Nagant around that, which shrank it down.
Yeah,
okay?
They made it work for the
cartridge. So now you get that guy, right? The little guy. Okay? And then, because it's military, they have to have a heavy trigger for double action, but the single action is very smooth. It's a decent gun. And then they go to sell it to Russia, and Russia goes, ooh, we can make it 7.62 to match our rifle bore, and then they build the whole gun around the cartridge again. And then this time,
building guns around cartridges is very pricey.
Right, and they do the math and they go, ooh, we really don't like the power we're getting out of this, so we need to get every bit of power we can out of it. So they go with a gas seal system, which is just torturously adapting around a cartridge that really isn't the cartridge you want.
Right.
But boy, howdy, do you sure want it to use the same rifling as your rifles, because that's the savings over here, even though it's a performative problem. I can't speak today. And so...
Yeah.
It
seems a lot of work to try to make the shoe fit on something that really clearly isn't working.
Yeah, so you start with good, and then you go with, well, can we get it to do that? And then you take that, step one, can we get it to do that? And you go, can we get it to do more? I will say that the one thing I do notice, by the way, between 1895, does this grip feel shorter to you?
Oh.
You want to hold that with the Swede?
Are my hands the same size? Yeah, no, that's definitely shorter. Check that out. I didn't even notice it till now. You're right.
Our Russian sources are a little limited on some of this stuff, but I have a feeling...
If I had a glove on, that wouldn't work for me.
I have a feeling the Russian 1895 uses the same grip length as the trials pistols that were sent over originally to Sweden, the first 7.5s that they only sent a few of. Because remember, it went to trials and the Swedes said, we want you to extend the grip a little bit. I think that's the original grip shape.
I bet you, yeah.
Which do you like better?
Wrong. I weirdly think I like the 95s better. The grip feels better for my hand because it lines me up better with the knuckle.
You don't even have a glove on.
No. If I had a glove on, I'd be screwed.
Yeah.
That's what I said before. If I had a glove on, I'd be totally screwed with it.
So,
that's pretty much it, isn't it?
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of guns for a second. Let's wind this back for a second.
Okay.
The Swede and Norwegian would have both been in service all the way through World War II.
Sure.
Both of them were displaced after World War... Well, before. Both of them, even before World War I, would have been displaced by automatic pistols coming in. Okay? But in a World War I-esque environment, with some of the other handguns we've seen, how much confidence do you have in carrying something like this around in that time period in a conflict?
So mechanically... These boys seem pretty solid. I can't see myself distrusting them. I would definitely put my life with that.
In terms of it going bang when you pull the trigger?
Yes, in terms of me just pulling the trigger, expecting it to go bang and function properly. Okay. Yes, no problem there. However, I'm not really jiving with that cartridge. Can I pick something else?
I think I'm just strong enough that the trigger mechanism, I feel like I can confidently get hits at short range on target.
Yeah.
I think I can point, pull, and not throw completely off.
I agree.
You feel like that?
I mean, I definitely do too. It is, don't get me wrong, it's Nagant territory heavy for that trigger pull, but I definitely think it is doable, especially when you add adrenaline and things like that into the mix.
I'm really worried when you say adrenaline. I'm really worried about the 7.5 millimeter being felt in time for it to matter in a fight.
Right.
Because at that close range, determined attacker...
Again, that's
I wanted to know he got hit. And I know that's the argument for 45, but...
That's what I was before. Like, no, I take the 9.4 because bigger bullet. It's definitely going to cause some,
that mass is
some stopping
hit.
power.
Yeah, I agree.
That's where my hesitancy lies with it.
This is better.
It's so sad.
Would you say that this is better?
Again, if for stopping power purposes, it's...
Copying me.
Pretty decent.
Copycat. Meow, meow, meow.
Meow, meow.
Now, Miss Kitty Cat, is there anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
Oh, God. I'm pretty happy to be able to try all these Nagants out. I frankly kind of want to refresh myself and reshoot that 95 again, so I may request a redo on the episode at some point in the near future, but I don't know how.
You want to redo an awful Revolver episode?
I kind of want to at least shoot it again.
Okay.
I at least want to try it again here soon in the near future. I may have to show a little blurb on it or something.
Do you feel better having explored the sort of transitional Nagant, the oddball of the family?
Better, more informed is the word I would choose.
I'm excited. You know, I've uncovered...
Why?
Because we go
uncovering the history?
Well, I go into it thinking, okay, there's the Swiss 82, and then there's the Swedish-Norwegian Nagants, and they're all the same cartridge, sort of. And they got adopted, but they're neutral countries and blah, 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 blah. And then you find out, oh no, there's a lot of influence on the rest of the handgun development. Like, stuff that this little bastard ends up being sort of the thing that communicates the Fanyu lockwork to the rest of the world. But because Sweden or Switzerland didn't give Fanyu any credit, his name gets lost forever.
Yeah, that's insane.
When we made the episode, we didn't even know it. We found that one out by accident later, right?
It's crazy, and we just did that episode.
But this became a highly influential revolver. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, it obscured its own inventor. And then this became sort of the middle ground before we get from what was essentially an equally competitive revolver. If I don't have it with me right now, but if we had the Fanyu, which is the papa of this thing.
Right.
That was a bit harsh. If we getting too excited. If we had the Fanyu,
he's talking about revolvers, he can't help himself.
If we had the Fanyu, who's the pop of this thing, they'd be roughly the same size and weight and everything else, and the same general utility.
Right.
But because of luck, Fanyu goes this way. The inventor gets dropped, never gets any credit, and then it turns into everybody's
he just
gun.
Disappears into the ether.
Because Nagant keeps pushing their military contracts, they get sucked into this weird zone.
Where they're following the cartridge.
Which is basically, yeah, you get this, which is the big boy wrapped around this cartridge.
They do not deviate from that yellow brick road.
And then it winds down into this, and once it gets to this, everybody goes, the heck are they doing? And then they just wander off. Because this scares everybody into going, no, I don't want any part of that.
I don't want to go to Oz. I'm good.
So it's just funny how the paths manage to clunk off of each other and then diverge, and one just goes right off the cliff, and the other one is still in production today.
Right.
It's just kind of nutty to see. And now I know it, and now you guys know it.
Yeah.
And you can't ever forget it. And you did indeed, well, I guess you couldn't forget it. As a matter of fact, you can only remember so many things. You've forgotten something important.
Oh, God.
You learned this, but now a little piece of your childhood is gone.
Well, maybe not that. Maybe they forgot something they didn't care about, like last Tuesday.
Oh, now you have unresolved trauma that you can never address because you don't remember it.
Where is he going with this? I don't know. Guys, I'm scared.
Anyway, have a good one.
Bye. We really want to try to do an excellent job for Rob. He honestly kind of reminds me of you, in that he's a dude trying his hardest to make what he's making, and he's doing a really good job. Yeah, and I'm kind of those people that like, oh, I see somebody working really hard. I want to help them. So my brain is just saying, let's do what we can for this man.
British Muzzleloaders is one of those channels that deserves a bigger audience.
Yes.
But struggles with it mostly because it's not his full-time job. Mm-hmm. He can't be consistent. He can't release at the exact same time every time. You know?
Right.
So there's people that are sworn allegiance to him. I highly recommend supporting him.
How was his mustache in person?
Delicious.
That was the word.
Yeah. Oh, I need one of those. A Peruvian Mauser? No, you, a Peruvian.
Immediately said Peruvian Mauser. No, what of you? What?
He tried to give me an out.
He did. And you didn't take
This
it.
autistic idiot, I'll just give him one out. And he's like, no. So I was really trying to hammer out. Somebody had the first generation of something that I really wanted to cover. And the first gens are harder to get than any of the other gens.
And we're keeping it a bit on the DL because we haven't hammered out details with him yet. But it's looking promising so far.
I haven't made secondary contact yet.
The actual indexing is coming from a part that you wouldn't be able to spot as a difference between this and the previous Norwegian or Swedish designs. It's just the hand. It's literally just...